Hi there, it's Christy with the Chirp YouTube channel. I am so glad you joined me today because I'm really excited about this video. It's been one that I've been planning in my head for quite some time, so I hope that it ends up being very useful to you and millions of other families or teachers who deal with a child who has sensory processing difficulties. What, you ask me, is a sensory processing disorder? Well, I think that's a great place to start. So, our sensory system is the way that our body takes in information from the world around us and also from within. We get information about all of the stuff that's going on in the world and all of the stuff that's going on internally through our different senses. You've probably learned about 5 of them in school when you were a kid, and the ones they usually teach are sight, hearing, smell, taste, and touch. But there are more sneaky ones that they did not teach you because maybe they weren't even found out about while you were in school, but also they're a little hard to describe to kids. Sensory processing disorder is when the body is not getting information properly through these channels that we have. Sometimes the body is too sensitive, which we call hypersensitive. Hyper means more than typically sensitive. And sometimes we are undersensitive to these stimuli, and that is called hyposensitivity. Hypo meaning undersensitive. Sometimes the body can be both at different times, or both at the same time, but through different channels. So you might find yourself, when you get overwhelmed, you're oversensitive to touch, and you're undersensitive to sight, or something like that. That's not very typical for that to happen, but it's possible. Today I'm going to talk about various ways that a child might demonstrate a sensory processing disorder and ways that you can provide appropriate support in the areas where your child needs it. Of course, I want to recommend right away that you find a great occupational therapist who specializes in sensory processing. They are not super common. That's not the most common kind of occupational therapist, but they definitely exist. And I've put a link down below that is a website specifically geared towards finding an occupational therapist with this kind of specialization. Can't guarantee anything about what your results will be, but that is probably a good place to start. You could also contact your child's public school, even if your child is not enrolled in that school, and you can ask for their special education department and then for their head of occupational therapy services. And that person should be able to give you some contacts for people who can help with sensory processing. Even if they don't provide it in the school to your particular child, you could get resources from that person or find a private therapist who could help you at home. Working with a professional in this area is going to be the easiest way to figure out what your child's sensory needs are and to think up and brainstorm together ways to meet those needs. But maybe this video can educate you a little bit more, kind of make it seem less intimidating, less overwhelming, help it make a little bit more sense to you when your occupational therapist says, let's try this. And you go, oh yeah, Christy mentioned one of those things in her video. Okay, that sounds reasonable. And in case it takes you a little while to find an appropriate professional, maybe this video could be helpful in the meantime. The first sensory thing I'm going to talk about is touch. What happens with your fingers, your skin, your tongue, all of those things. This is also known as the tactile system. This is sensory information that comes in through your skin. So you want to look at your child and pay attention to whether your child avoids certain textures, certain substances, certain types of touch. A lot of kids really like light touch, or they hate light touch and they really like heavy, rough kind of handling. Whether your child seeks certain kinds of touch or textures or avoids them is kind of what you're looking for here. A child with difficulties in this area may refuse to wear socks. I notice a lot of myself when I was putting together this talk, because as a child I would spend much longer than my mother would have preferred trying to get that seam across my toes on my sock just right, because it really bothered me all day long, and I really hated that sensation. I have difficulty if there are tags in the back of my clothes because they itch all day long, or they poke me, or they just feel really distracting to me, and I find it difficult to function sometimes because those kind of sensations are pretty overwhelming. Your child may spend ages trying to adjust a shirt because of an itchy tag or a seam. Your child may refuse to eat mushy foods, or lumpy foods, or crunchy foods, or other textures of foods that you think are not offensive, but your child thinks that they are offensive. Many kids who are called picky eaters actually have difficulty processing tactile stimuli in their mouths, so that's something to keep in mind. If your child shows signs of tactile defensiveness, so not wanting to touch certain textures or certain substances, the best way to help is by encouraging exploration of a wide variety of different textures and substances. So painting with our hands or our feet or our knees or our noses, playing with sand, playing with magic sand, which is kind of more of a clumpy type of sand that you can sculpt and things like that. Putting grapes in a pail and stamping them, even making grape juice if you want, playing with applesauce, holding pine cones that are really prickly, sprinkling bird seed out for the birds, baking with batter and dough that are really sticky and messy. Getting messy is really the best way to help your child move through being avoidant of certain textures, is just providing those textures over and over and over and over, but in fun and engaging ways where you can prove that they're not actually, they might still not be pleasurable for the child, but they can become pleasurable. And even if they're not pleasurable, they can be tolerable, and then your child can function in the world better. Don't protect your child from the textures that he wants to avoid, because that's going to lead to even more avoidance. And then when your child's an adult and someone says, let's go to the beach, and he says, I don't like the sand, he's missing out on a huge range of experiences that otherwise he would be able to tolerate. Even if he didn't love the feeling of the sand, he could still go to the beach with his friends because he was able to tolerate it because of the fun play that you guys did with sand when he was little. If your child is a picky eater, let him experience food textures first with his fingers, with his feet, painting with carrots instead of just immediately trying to eat them. And then, after a long time of doing that, then introduce that item as a food item. Or just say, I wonder if we bite it, how that would feel. Wow, it's really hard and crunchy. What if we try to chew it a little bit? Let's take a bite. So we play, we make it fun, we make it seem like an investigation of the world rather than, here's your carrot, you eat it or you don't get anything else. That is a little bit different. Remember that it takes at least 20 exposures to any new food item before a child feels like it's familiar and before most children will become comfortable eating that item on a regular basis. Make eating a really fun adventure where some things will taste great, some things will be neutral, and some things will taste really, really bad. But it's not the end of the world if something tastes really bad. That's okay. Everybody has preferences. There are certain things we have to eat a little bit of, and we have to try something at least 20 times before we don't eat it anymore. And you can make up your own family rules about what is required when it comes to food. But it should still be playful, it should still be fun, and there should be low stress around eating for these kids who are picky about it because it's already a really high stress activity. If your child is really very picky, or if you're having a lot of struggles with this, or just if you want more information about it, there's a great book called Just Take a Bite. And I'm going to put it down below. It's not very difficult to read, not very long, great big writing and good pictures and fantastic recommendations, whether you have a kid who's really significantly picky and won't let anything in his mouth, or whether it's a kid who just won't eat mushy things. All along the range, it has great recommendations for all of those different areas of need, and I really love the book. It's calm, it's rational, it gives you some great suggestions. So go look at the link below and take a peek at it, because I think you'll like it. If your child's really, really picky, you're concerned about not having a wide enough range of foods that your child's eating to fill his nutritional needs, or to be able to have a typical life with typical foods involved, I recommend that you talk to a feeding specialist. And once again, your public school can probably help you find a good one, but you can also look them up in your area. Just Google feeding specialist or something like that. I can't really put links for that down below because it depends on where you live, what kind of links there will be. But a feeding therapist is either an occupational therapist or a speech language pathologist who have had extra training and mentoring and experience in the area of feeding. And we're not talking about eating, we're talking about getting little kids to eat. And so they're trained specially to think about the sensory portions of eating, as well as the correct posture and the muscles required for chewing certain things, because sometimes eating crunchy things is really hard for kids if they have underdeveloped chewing muscles, things like that. So those people are your best experts for dealing with that issue in particular. So moving on to sensory area number 2, I'm going to combine smell and taste a little bit, because they're pretty similar to what we just discussed about tactile and touch defensiveness, because most kids are not craving smell and taste. There are kind of two sorts of sensory groups, and one category of sensory experiences are the ones that typically children avoid them, and that's smell, taste, and touch for the most part. That's where kids kind of don't touch me like that, I don't like that smell, that seam is bothering me, those sort of things. And then there's another category of sensory experiences that typically children crave more of. And so I'm going to talk about those sort of in the second half of the video, and about the ones that kids avoid more in this first half. And so smell and taste are another group, another two more, I guess, that kids typically avoid rather than seek out. So if your child is oversensitive and avoids certain smells and tastes, talk with your child about what he likes and what he doesn't like. Make it kind of a back and forth conversation. How far away can he smell that celery? How tiny of a bite can he take of the celery before he can actually taste that horrible taste that he doesn't like? Keep exposing your child to the sensations that he doesn't enjoy in increasingly large doses. You're not trying to be mean, you're just trying to help your child be more functional. You're trying to help your child be more tolerant of things that otherwise would affect his life pretty greatly if he doesn't get used to them just a little bit. Try smell or taste testing. So maybe put cotton balls with a couple of essential oil drops on them, and put them in little boxes or little Ziploc that you have sneakily labeled somewhere. If your child can read, make it somewhere, make it in code or something, and then you take it out of the bag, or you just open the bag a little and sniff, and you practice labeling the smells that you're smelling. And this way it becomes more of a fun game when you smell stuff, rather than, oh, I smell something and I hate that smell. It becomes, the scenario that you're putting it in is a pleasant scenario instead of the typical one that your child experiences with a horrible smell, that it's horrible, it's horrible, it's horrible, that's all I can think is it's bad. And instead you're putting kind of a fun spin on it, which makes it more tolerable. do the same thing with sniffing spices or guessing what kind of vegetable that tiny little piece was. Was it a piece of celery? Was it a piece of green pepper? Was it an apple? Who knows? When the piece is that small, you have to really work hard to figure out what it was. And because the pieces are so small, it's also less offensive. So think of all sorts of different little games that you can play with your child to make these experiences pleasant and to make very small amounts of a distressing thing fun, and therefore the distress level will decrease. But actually, as I meet more students and try this technique with more kids, I'm finding that more and more of them benefit from this next thing I'm going to talk about, which is a sour or a spicy taste in their mouth. We have a lot of kids who have difficulty attending to a task, difficulty listening during a listening intensive part of their day, difficulty managing their own behavior. And I am discovering that a cinnamon candy, or they have sprays now, they're kind of like those old breath refresher spray things. But they come in flavors now, and they have a spicy one that's like a cinnamon flavor. They have a sour one. They're not super common. I will do my best to find links to them though and put them below. If you can't find those, cinnamon candy and peppermint candy are your next best options. And I know it's not great to give kids candy all the time. There are some peppermints that I just saw at my health food store that are called Xyla, Xyla. They're made with xylitol, which is a natural sweetener, which actually decreases the chance of cavities for kids, and they have like 1 calorie a piece, so they're not quite like your normal piece of candy. So I would recommend something like that. Also, they only have 3 ingredients, xylitol and peppermint oil being 2 of them, and I don't remember what the third one is, but it's pretty innocuous. And the peppermint oil not only helps a child become alerted, but it gives a very alerted sense to the mouth as well. And that somehow perks up a child's attention and helps him to concentrate at certain times. Sometimes chewing gum can have this. We don't know if it's the chewing of the gum, like the muscle movement, which we suspect that's part of it, because we'll get to chewing in a little while. But it could also be the peppermint oil that's in a lot of peppermint gums, because that is such an alerting and arousing, in a good way, sort of flavor and scent as well. So if you have kids, you want to try some sort of stimulation like that for them, I suggest the cinnamon candies or the peppermint ones. See if it helps. Sometimes I have seen it work wonderfully well to help kids in a group setting, or listening at story time, or working on an independent project when otherwise they'd kind of be all over the place. There are some times when I give my whole small group 1 little peppermint each while we work on something, if it's a totally crazy day. And it really, not only does it make them feel like they're getting a treat, but it gives them some sensory stimulation that I think all of them actually need during that time. You can also use purposeful aromas. This has not been a very common strategy because aromas are so personal, and it's very difficult to use that in a classroom setting. So it hasn't really been used by classroom teachers and that sort of thing. But you can use diffusers with essential oils to mask unpleasant scents that your child doesn't like, and also to help your child calm down. I recommend getting a bunch of essential oil testers if you can, and talking through it with your child. If your child is verbal and you can talk through it with him, you can say, okay, sniff this one, and then we're going to wait a few minutes. Are you feeling any different? Do you like the smell? Do you not like the smell? And you can talk through which things he would like in his special diffuser and which things he would not. You can make up your own little mixes. You can try one of those pre-made ones for calm and well balance, or however you want to do it. But it is a good thing to give it a try. And there's a lot of benefits to not only to smelling pretty smells, but to the oils themselves. They seem to have some very good benefits. And I'll put some links down below to essential oil type helpful sites. The third thing I'm going to talk about sensory system wise are sounds. The most children in the area of sound are oversensitive to sound. So this is another thing that they tend to avoid. Many people are sensitive to loud sounds, not just because they damage our ears and make our ears hurt, but because they're startling. They tend to raise our dopamine level, and a lot of us, introverts like me included, want biologically to keep our dopamine levels low because that's where we feel the best. People with ADHD want their dopamine levels to be a lot higher. They like loud noises. They like to watch movies where things are exploding and people are crashing their cars. I find that so overstimulating that it makes me feel crazy and like I need to cry or crawl in a hole somewhere. My brother, who has ADHD, loves it. He could watch that stuff all day long. It helps him to feel relaxed and regulated. We're two different people. So look at your child and say, maybe loud noises are something that are too much for my kid. People with autism can be oversensitive to sound. Sometimes they can be undersensitive to sound. Sometimes they really tend to have a great ability to tune out the entire world around them, including all the sensory inputs that come in. And so sometimes we have to do an additional Callie, a physical prompt as well as a verbal one or an auditory type thing in order to get those children's attention. Also, people with hearing impairments can be very startled by certain noises or certain frequencies. So you may think, oh, well, that child has a hearing loss. She's not going to be offended by this loud noise. But we don't know where that hearing loss is. It could be only in the low frequencies. And so that high frequency squeal that comes out of the microphone is horribly painful. We have no idea. And so it's best just to keep our eyes on the child and learn as much as we can by watching. So pay attention to what jars or what surprises or upsets your child. If it's really easy to see, you'll notice a loud noise or loud environment, and then you'll see behaviors you don't like. So your child may cover his ears. He may start to do behaviors that show you this is an upsetting situation for him. He may have a tantrum. He may scream or hum or sing really loud because that actually can, internally, it can block out some of the external noises. And then there are children like me who can hold it together a little bit better in a loud environment, but then I want to get away pretty quickly, and when I get home, I want to do things that are very, very soothing to me. I may put myself in my bedroom and have a lot of time by myself with a book. I might choose to turn nature sounds on, put a nature video in my DVD player and watch the ocean go in and out. I may choose to have a quiet conversation with my husband. Usually I don't choose any conversations after a really loud and hectic and chaotic experience. Usually I need time by myself so that my sensory system can reset. My brother gets overwhelmed like this too, even though he has ADHD. He gets overwhelmed in a different way, and he has the cutest phrase. He has to go and take a very short little nap, and he calls it rebooting. He's a computer guy. So I need to reboot. So keep this in mind when you are dealing with your own child. Don't schedule busyness after busyness after busyness if you know that you have a child who needs to reboot after a busy activity, because you will be setting yourself up for a disaster and you'll be setting your child up for failure, and nobody likes that. So a lot of times if your child is saying, I don't want to go to Target right now, I don't want to go to Target, and getting a little teary, it's not because your child is trying to be a brat and control and manipulate you. It's because your child knows that he cannot handle another really busy, loud environment right now. And he's trying to communicate that to you in the best way he knows how. So keep that in mind and be gentle with your child, and hopefully gentle with yourself too. You might want to add nature sounds and soothing ambient video into your home and into your child's day. go outside, maybe record some birds on your phone so that your child can play those back when he needs to add a little extra calm to his life. Practice using quiet sounds and loud sounds in a fun way. So even though I don't really like long periods of noise, I really do like turning up the stereo and listening to super loud music that rattles the windows for 5 or 10 minutes once in a while. It's not very often, but I do realize that in spite of the fact that it's not my preference, there are times when it's really fun. And that's kind of where we want your child to be. We want your child to realize that it's okay to have a preference, but it really becomes limiting when we only always have to stick with that preference or we can't handle life anymore. That's where we become boxed in and tied up, and we don't want that for our child. There are also listening programs that I've recently learned about that help your child become desensitized to some of those normal noisy events in human life, like airplanes flying too close, or a train going by, or an emergency siren, or even toilets flushing and that kind of thing. And like I said, I've just learned about these. I think it's a great idea, and I've put the links to those in the info box. So go check them out, because what a great thing to buy. The fourth sensory category I'm going to talk about is vision. Now, this one is kind of mixed. Some kids seek it out and some kids avoid it. So you have to pay attention once again to your own kid or your own students, because kids all have different visual needs. Some need extra visual stimulation and some need less visual stimulation than is typical. If your child tends to get really close up to things, look at them really close up. If your child tends to take a train and go meow right in front of his eyes, if he likes to take your iPhone or your Android, which I have, and swipe things, maybe it doesn't even matter what he's swiping, he's just swiping something really close to his eyes, this is telling you that he needs extra stimulation visually. In a moment, I'm going to talk about a sensory diet, which doesn't have anything to do with food. It has to do with periods prescribed throughout the day where we feed a child sensory experiences. And so one of the ways that you can deal with a child who needs more visual input is by adding some of the following experiences to your child's sensory meals spaced throughout the day. You can add light spinners. I happened to bring one with me today that I found at the drugstore. It looks like this, and when you push the button, it lights up and it spins around. This is great for so many reasons. Number one, it's a cause and effect thing, so your child has to learn how to do that. You can practice pushing it with so many different fingers. It vibrates, it buzzes. I don't know, you can probably hear it makes a really soothing little buzzing noise. It's super cute. Look at his little face. That's so cute. This is an Easter one. Most holidays, Target will have them, Walgreens, CVS will have them. This one I think is from Walgreens. The dollar store will usually have these little guys. You can get really big ones. These were just the cheapest ones, and I wanted a whole bunch of them so that they would last until our next major holiday, and so that I would have enough for every student in my class and all of the adults too, because we want to dance around in the dark and shake our thing with these fun little buzzers, spinners. So I found Hello Kitty ones, I found this rabbit, I found a duck, I found all sorts of different light spinners. These are great for providing extra sensory input. So you might just have this in your child's sensory diet box, and when it's time for sensory time, 3 or 5 times a day, we take the box down and your child can do whatever in that box that he finds to be the most pleasurable at that moment. I kind of can't stop pushing this button now. Okay, so you can have light spinners. You can try gears. I have a couple of videos that I've done on the Gearation toy, which is super great for visual input. I'm going to put that link right over here so that you can go see that. By the way, if you click on one of these links, this current video that you're watching will pause. The new video will open in a new window and in a new tab, in a new window. I don't know for sure. It will open and it will take you there automatically, and then you can come back and finish watching this one whenever you're done with that one. You can use a train set and practice driving them by really close in front of the child's eyes and give him the input that way. You can do small race cars, like Matchbox cars, or even the ones that are electronic, so you push the button and they zoom around really fast. You can use a penguin run, and I have a video that included some clips of a penguin run, so I'll put that video over here right now so that you can take a peek at that. It's a great little game and it serves this purpose very well. You can also use other kinds of light up toys. There are tons of them. I have one in my classroom that it's a spinning ball, so kind of like a mirror ball, except for it's spiraling in a little base, and then there are colored lights pointed at it. So as it spins, the lights go all over the ceiling. But it was fairly inexpensive. I think it was maybe $25. I don't have to hang it from the ceiling. It just plugs into the wall. It's very convenient. So your child can sit in his room with the lights off and turn this thing on, and it can meet a lot of those visual stimulation needs that he might have. If your child covers his eyes up, gets really hyper in a room that's visually very stimulating, or if he seems easily overwhelmed, you might want to try a calmer visual environment. So this is the other end of the visual needs spectrum. So you want to remove things off the walls, try fewer colors in that room, and use more soothing colors and maybe more nature-y type palette of greens and blues and creams and browns and that kind of thing. Okay, so that is the end of the sensory categories where children typically tend to be more on the avoidant side. And now I'm going to talk about the categories where, number one, we haven't really usually heard of these categories before, and number two, kids usually are seeking these rather than avoiding them. Kids usually crave this sort of input, and that makes it especially fun because we get to think of creative ways to provide it. And with the following sensory categories, this is where I'm going to talk about a sensory diet. I mentioned it briefly a few minutes ago, but consider how we feed ourselves food. We do not just graze throughout the day. We sit down 3 or 5 times a day and we eat a meal until we are full. If we just graze throughout the day, we're never actually full. We're constantly eating, but we never actually get to a state where we feel full, or else we're full all the time. But most of us, we don't get like that because we're not eating in large enough portions if we just graze. We purposely feed ourselves the foods we know are going to meet our needs, whether our needs are physical or nutritional or emotional or psychological. Our body tends to tell us what it wants right then. We don't always listen, but our body does tell us. This is what a sensory diet is. So think of it, instead of being about food, it's about sensory needs, about meeting the needs of our body's sensory system. For children who crave more sensory stimulation than a typical child does, those events throughout the day that we typically have, so getting in the car, driving to school, playing on the playground, sitting in class, those kind of things, those events during a day don't provide enough sensory food for that child to feel calm and regulated. And so we create 3 to 5 meals for that child per day, where the child gets to sit and eat sensory experiences until he is full, or until the time runs out. This isn't usually a really 2-hour long thing. We'd never have anything else in our lives. Usually it's 15 to 20 minutes of sensory focused activity 3 to 5 times a day. And the idea is that if the child is fed meals of sensory input, he won't need to snack all day long, and he won't become sensorily overwhelmed and be out of control the way that he was before, because he'll be getting his sensory needs met. So if a child is demonstrating, for example, a need for deep pressure, and we'll talk about this in a minute, during the child's sensory meals, We have him bounce on a trampoline. We sit on a yoga ball that's on top of him. We wrap him up in a blanket and really very tightly. We have him carry heavy things for us, or we put a weighted vest on him for 15 to 20 minutes. And I'll give you more examples of sensory diet activities in each of the following sensory categories, and I'll put links below to additional activities that you can brainstorm and browse through and pick from to add to your child's sensory diet in the following areas too. So, sensory category number 5 is vestibular. Now, have you ever heard of the vestibular sense? Most of us haven't. But it has to do with movement and balance. And the name comes because this sense is located in your inner ear, or the sense isn't really located. A sense is formed or centered in your inner ear, where you have a thing called your vestibular canal. And it's sort of like a level with bubble. You know how there's a bubble in that level, and it can tell you based on, I don't know that there's actually a bubble in there, but there is liquid, and it tells you whether you're straight up, whether you're cocked to one side, whether you're upside down. But it also gives you a feeling of rightness and appropriateness in the world. Kids who have extra needs in the vestibular area often love to be upside down. They love to spin. They love to climb really high. Anything that moves their head from one position to another position. You might notice the child spinning around and around and around. You might notice him wrapping himself up in the drapes, because that's another thing that requires you to spin. He might climb bookcases. He might request, when he's little, to be held upside down over and over and over, fly like an airplane in a circle. He might, when he's a little bit older, he might be always hanging upside down from the monkey bars. He might love to ride in cars. That might be the one thing that always calms him down, is going for a ride in the car, maybe even sticking his head out the window. Things that cause changes in head position like this are the things to notice, because that's where the vestibular sense is. It's inside your head. So notice what your child gravitates to as far as movement, and then provide that as much as possible in a more and more appropriate way than how your child is currently doing it. And add those more appropriate activities to your child's sensory diet, those 3 to 5 sensory meals throughout the day. And some of those activities might be swinging. Swinging is one of the best ways to get that vestibular need met. There also are swings. In my classroom, I have a swing that goes around like this. I'll put a video right here of some of the activities in my classroom, and you'll be able to see a picture and sort of an example of the kind of swing that I'm talking about now that goes around in a circle. Mine is from IKEA, and it's not usually used as a back and forth swing because we don't have enough room in the classroom for that. We have it in a corner, and ours pretty much is just meant for going around in circles. You can do those sit and spin things. Slides take your head from one position to another pretty quickly. Gliders, so those things you can sit on and they kind of go back and forth. Climbing equipment of any kind that's actually appropriate and not your cabinets that are not hooked to the wall at all and could just topple over and smush your child. Stretches that include upside down time. Somersaults, just putting somersaulting. Maybe the sensory diet box has a card in it that says 10 somersaults, and so that's part of your child's diet. Being pulled in a wagon, riding a bike, rocking chairs, all of these things provide a lot of vestibular feedback and input, so that's fabulous. Now I'm going to talk about proprioception, and this is probably the weirdest one for us to understand as people who don't, if we don't have this need ourselves of extra proprioceptive input, and yet I find it the most intriguing. And this is the very last one I'm going to talk about, so keep your ears on. You can make it through this video. You can do it. So proprioception is a sense of the body itself, and this sense is provided by feedback from your joints and your muscles and your tendons and all the fibers that hold you together. Children who crave more proprioceptive input usually will show you behaviors like crashing into walls, crashing into people, wanting to be squeezed or squished, especially on the head. A lot of my kids with autism will come up and they'll put your hands on their head and they'll push into you because they want you to squeeze their head. And it seems really weird to those of us who don't crave that input, but it's very soothing to them and it helps them to stay calm and regulated. Difficulty with motor activities, especially fine motor activities. Kids who need more proprioceptive input, their joints and muscles are not giving them appropriate feedback to be able to tell where their hand is in space. And that makes it very difficult to do things in space, especially things that require very fine control and detail. These kind of kids love crashing. They love crashing into anything, and so they often do high-risk activities that seem more likely to lead to crashing. But of course, those things also lead to injury, which is bad. At least I think. Those things may be like jumping out of trees, jumping off the roof, crashing a bike, or building this huge bike ramp and then riding over it. Sometimes these kids are thinking more about the sensation that they're seeking than they are thinking about the results of other options, other outcomes of that activity, and so they seem to be a little bit maybe not smart in their choice making, because of course we see that ramp is 100 feet high. You're not going to just get a nice deep pressure feeling from that. You're going to die. And we think that, but that's not what the kid is necessarily thinking. These kids really, really like to wrestle because they're getting a lot of that deep squeeze, sort of here's where your body is kind of pressure. They love crunchy foods and biting on things. Sometimes maybe they're clothes, and it may be carrots or pretzels. Those are usually the other two big ones. A lot of times they like having their eyes closed or covered as well, because when your eyes are closed, there's something that sort of perks up your body to recognize where it begins and where it ends. And I also want to say in this point that there was a brand new study that came out recently where there was discussion of this particular sense in relation to anorexia and bulimia. And the theory behind it was that anorexics and bulimics, because when they look in the mirror, they don't see what the rest of the world sees. They still see an overweight person. The rest of the world sees a person who is far too thin most of the time. Not always, but most of the time. The theory was maybe these people have a proprioceptive pathology. Maybe they don't recognize where their body actually ends and what is them and what is not them. And so they put people who had anorexia in wetsuits, which are very tight, very squeezing, and what a lot of the studies on people with autism have shown is that they benefit a great deal from that squeezing, that really, like we would swaddle a baby, that sort of same feeling. And so they put these people with anorexia in wetsuits, and their chance of recovery was tremendously higher. They just were more likely to do well and be able to gain weight and return to health. And I find that extremely fascinating because it so much mimics the way that our children with issues in this area seem to react to that same deep pressure. So there are, as far as helps in this area for that deep pressure feeling, I don't think you want to send your child to school in a wetsuit, but Under Armour makes really squeezy sort of under things if you live in an area that's not too hot. Here in the desert, we're not about to send our kids to school in that if we can help it because it's so hot. But anything that is tight and constricting, not in one specific place like a belt or a jeans band, but that is sleek and form-fitting and squeezy is likely to be the most helpful. Think of ways that you could make your child feel like there's more gravity on him. Because the more gravity it is, the more aware you are of your body. right? If there's no gravity, you feel like you haven't even got a body. You're just floating through space, like in water. You feel kind of like you and the water, you're one, or something like that. Whereas when the gravity is heavier on you, you feel very aware of every step. You feel very aware of your muscles and your joints and how hard they're working. And that's the kind of feeling we want to create for your kids when we're thinking about kids who have difficulty in the area of proprioception. So, sit on your child with a pillow or a yoga ball underneath you, in between you and him. I used to do this all the time with kids when I did private therapy, because if it's the easiest way to engage a child if you meet their sensory needs, because it's fun. Without meeting a child's sensory needs, there's no way that they are going to be able to engage successfully, because they've got this huge unmet need that's like an itch that's not getting scratched. It's like trying to have an intelligent conversation with anyone who has not eaten in 3 days. It's just not going to work. We're not very rational in those situations. Let your children's siblings try. So maybe first you take the yoga ball and you sit on the one child, and do put carpet or a blanket underneath, so the floor, if you have hard floor, so it doesn't, we don't want to damage your child. But for some kids, it sounds horrible, but for some kids, even the yoga ball and a full-size adult sitting on the yoga ball is not enough pressure for that child. There are, in fact, machines, I will put a link down below, that have been created that are sort of like a steamroller. And they're quite expensive, but hopefully they'll keep getting cheaper and cheaper as more companies maybe are able to produce something similar. But your child can adjust by moving the clips where it clips. Your child can adjust how tight it squeezes him. And they're really soothing for all children and all adults too, not just kids who require more pressure. And so that's something to consider if you kind of have unlimited resources. But if you have limited resources, or if you're just not ready to spring for that, you can use the yoga ball trick, and it still benefits your child a huge amount. So it could be your turn to sit on your child, and then it could be sister's turn to sit on him, and then it could be his turn to sit on the sister. And it can be a really fun family event. Some of the most fun memories that I have of my clients are when we were doing sensory activities like this, and they were feeling calm, they were having great social interactions, and it was a really fun adventure for everyone. Very therapeutic and very educational as well. A trampoline, because you're jumping up and then slamming your feet down, even though it's bouncy, it's still a very grounding sort of activity that helps you feel your body. Stomping your feet, clapping your hands to music, that can be very helpful. Playing the drums in the same way. There's something called joint compressions. I can't really do it very easily on myself, and you really should be trained by a professional how to do this. I have not seen any online resources that actually tell you how to do this. But ask your child's occupational therapist. Even if your child doesn't get occupational therapy, you can go into your public school and ask to speak with the occupational therapist, or make an appointment and ask him or her to teach you how to do some of these sensory techniques so that you can help your child better. So joint compressions are basically where you gently push the joints. So this hand would be pushing on this. This is really hard to demonstrate all by myself. But so assume I have my finger in the middle, and I'm gently pushing on this joint to push it closer together. And then I would gently put one hand here and one hand here and push on this joint and push it a little closer together. And what they're discovering is that feeling also raises the awareness of the joints, muscles, and ligaments in the body. And of course we have joints all over our body, so you can do this on finger joints, wrist joints, elbows, shoulders, knees, ankles, feet. Anywhere where there's one of those nicely accessible joints, you can do this technique. But some kids really hate it, but a lot of kids crave it once they know it's available and will start asking for it. Use weighted vests. This is a great option for those of you who don't have the space or the means for a squeeze machine or one of those steamrollers I mentioned, who want to provide great heavy input for that deep pressure that your child needs, and maybe who can't. I find the yoga ball technique fantastic, but I'm there specifically for that child. What if your child needs deep pressure while you're trying to make dinner or while you're working? Well, a weighted vest is a great way to meet that need that your child can do independently, because it's kind of like if you imagine a denim vest. Most of them aren't made of denim. Most of them are made of some kind of breathable material that's, more like a athletic type wear, sort of like an Under Armour type material, but they have weights in them, little sand bags or something like that, and so they're heavy, usually between 10 and 20 pounds for a medium-sized child to an adult, and then less under that. But you just decide based on your child, and your child will tell you, this one is too heavy, this one is not heavy enough. It can make a dramatic difference in a child's self-regulation ability and in behavior. Sometimes a kid cannot control himself because he does not know where his body is in space. And you put a vest on and all of a sudden you will see them sort of just relax into themselves frequently. And that's an amazing thing to watch. I always have one of these in my classroom. Lifting weights. If your child is a teenager or an adult, getting some kind of weightlifting routine going is a fantastic idea. Using vibrating things. That little rabbit that I mentioned, not only is this great because it provides the visual input, but it buzzes and it just feels great buzzing away in my little hand. Also, if you happen to live in a place where you have grass and lawns, you might make it part of your child's job to mow the lawn. That gives a really nice vibration, and it also is heavy work. So he's pushing something heavy and getting that feedback against his joints, ligaments, muscles, and tendons, but also doing something productive. And so it's good for so many reasons. A riding lawnmower is also a really good option. Maybe not so much for obviously not for younger kids, but not maybe for teenagers who have more significant motor difficulties because they'll crash. But for somebody who has great motor abilities but needs that deep proprioceptive feedback, those are really buzzy and they can feel very soothing and calming for kids who need that or crave it. Bowling, you're using a heavy ball and you're knocking stuff down. That is pretty cool. Take your kid bowling maybe regularly. But also, I made a little video about how you can do bowling at home and have some of the same heavy input results. So take a peek at that video right over there and it'll give you another good idea. Use body socks. I am going to put another link right up here to a video that I did with just a very short little video about what a body sock looks like and how we use it. And they're basically a thin material that a child can see through, but we can't see in. And it's very stretchy, so it acts as one of those sort of Under Armour suits, and yet it's in the shape of a sock. And so you put it over the child's head, and then they can push against it in any direction. It's not hampering breathing, but it's over their entire body. And so they can make a starfish, they can be a tree, and it provides that push back against their body that allows them to feel where their body begins and where it ends. With some of that need for biting, we also have a really cool option that we can add to our child's sensory diet, which are chewy tubes of various kinds. This one is from a set called P's and Q's. I think it could be a Q or a P, or I don't, anyway. And this is one that is textured. I don't love this one because do you see this hole all the way through? Some kids decide that this is a trumpet and they blow it like a trumpet and spit is just everywhere dripping off of this thing. So that is disgusting. The P works better because it has no hole, and I like the texture better. It's like is just a little bit better. This one's a little sturdier and this one's a little bit more bendy. They're still both quite firm. There's also a third option that I have right here, which is a little necklace that's made of that. Even this is not even a string, it's that same rubbery material. So if your child likes something thin to chew on, this part would be great. It's kind of stretchy. And if your child likes or needs something thicker at any moment, you could chew on this. And it actually looks really cool. I could wear that with this outfit and chew on it and not feel super awkward. So if you have teens or something, this might be a great option. That is the end of my little discussion on sensory needs and some of the ways that you can meet them. And it's a big topic. And I'm not an occupational therapist. I have a lot of experience in this area just because of the populations that I've worked with and because they all have had sensory needs of some kind, as do I, as does my brother. And so I have a lot of knowledge, but I'm not an occupational therapist. And so please do find one, a good one that loves your kid, that works well with you. But in the meantime, try out some of these strategies because they might help your family immensely. And no matter what, you can always learn from your child and help your child navigate the world in a more successful way. I hope you have a wonderful day and bless you for being such a positive influence in your family's life, in your child's life, or in the lives of your students. Have a great day. Bye.